Gamma, I would like a translucent mantle made of a gel-like substance. Sorry, but we only have 4 mantles and none of them are like that. Oh, well, then I guess I'll just have to develop my own one. Ooh, with tools? Tools? With tools, right? Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, as we push into the summer season, at least within Monster Hunter Wilds, we have a new festival coming up for the game extremely soon, and with this festival we'll have another arch-tempered monster. This means another arch-tempered monster armor set to go along with it, and that could be quite good. The first arch-tempered monster we had was Ray Dow, and his Gamma armor set was just an improved version of his base armor set, meaning that it focused on similar skills, but had better budgeted pieces, meaning they either had more skills, better skills, or more decoration space as well, and of course the Lord's Soul group bonus. Because of this, we expect all arch-tempered monsters to get the same sort of treatment, a power-boosted version of their base armor set, better skill space, or just better skills in general, the same set bonus as the monster's original base armor, and then probably also going to be sharing the Lord's Soul group bonus, which is a very hefty effect. And with the Ray Dow armor being prevalent in meta sets for the majority of weapon types in the game, even still, this brings the question of how good will Uth Duna Gamma armor set be? And while we obviously don't know the answer to that until we have the full armor itself in the game, we can talk about the base Uth Duna set and the parts of it that will definitely matter moving forward to the arch-tempered version, with what is essentially pre-testing, preparatory explorations done with the things that we do already know. That said, Uth Duna armor is heavily based around peak performance as a skill, so I would expect peak performance to be the skill that is really efficiently placed on these pieces, as well as tool specialist as well as another option, the other skill that hits very high ranks on Uth Duna's armor set. Along with this, I wouldn't be surprised if her Gamma ticket unlocks an extra rank for either the peak performance charm or tool specialist charm as well, so keep an eye out for that on release to possibly be changing. Along with this, we expect Uth Duna's armor to keep its regular set bonus, which is increased defense after using a mantle, or a larger defense buff and resistance increase after using a mantle if you have the full 4-piece bonus instead of just 2 of them. So let's break down the exact meaning of the set bonus and what you can expect out of it in an average hunt, and then we'll also talk about peak performance in general as the main offensive skill we expect to see on this armor set in the Gamma version. For the set bonus then, Uth Duna's cover, which gives you the effect Protective Veil. The text for this is relatively accurate, but it's far from specific enough to tell you what it really does. It doesn't give you the actual numbers, and it doesn't tell you what the duration or really even the specific activation and condition for it is, because it's not just while you have a mantle on, it's a buff that activates when you put the mantle on to begin with. That said, Protective Veil 1, which is the 2 set bonus, gives you 25 defense while active. The 4 set bonus gives you 50 defense and plus 12 to all resistances while it's active too. This effect is pretty meaningless to the majority of players, honestly, as most people just like to focus their builds purely on offense when they're making their damage sets, and so for those people, you should already know that you probably don't care about this set bonus to begin with. That said, if you do care about defense, or if you just want to know exactly how much value this could offer you through a quest, we've got some math and testing to do with it. First up, the way the skill reads, it's easy to assume that it means that you get the buff for the duration of a mantle's uptime. So the longer the mantle is active, the longer you keep it on, the longer the buff is. But actually, that's not correct at all. This buff is not tied to your mantle being active. It simply applies a buff to you and starts a timer when you put the mantle on. This timer is exactly 3 minutes and accounts for both ghillie mantle and for any of the selectable mantles too, meaning that you will always have 2 sources of activation for the set bonus. This is an important distinction because without this knowledge, you would then assume that ghillie mantle can only give you the increased defenses for a single hit until of course it's then removed from you, or that your other mantle choice then decides how potent the effect is, because a longer duration mantle should mean that this effect is active more often, right? No, because neither of those things is correct. Protective Veil is always a 3-minute duration that starts after you put a mantle on, regardless of which mantle you use, and regardless of if the mantle comes off early or if you take the mantle off manually early as well. And importantly, if you were to put on another mantle during the duration, it does just reset the duration. It doesn't like just completely not do anything, like if you activate Counter-Strike or Adrenaline Rush early again. Activating Protective Veil again while it's already active does reset the duration. It's not a negative. All of the selectable mantles in the game then have a 600-second cooldown, which is also 10 minutes. Ghillie Mantle, however, which you will always have on you by default, has half of that cooldown being 5 minutes. This means that realistically without Tool Specialist you could activate this bonus 3 times within the first 10 minutes of a hunt for a total of 9 minutes of uptime, which is actually quite impressive. That's like 90%, but that means using your mantles at a specific time to maximize this uptime. And it's also worth mentioning that this isn't consistent. It's not 9 minutes out of every 10 minutes of hunting, it's 9 minutes out of the first 10 minutes of the hunt. The majority of hunts in Monster Hunter Wilds will be done by most players in less than 10 minutes to do, so that is the important part to know, but because of the way that the cooldown timers work and stuff like that, it does become a bit less reliable over time, as the first set that you do to make this happen is activating Ghillie Mantle right at the start of the fight, then you use whatever your selected mantle is after 3 minutes, then you use Ghillie Mantle again once the buff falls off from that. But then obviously you can't just instantly use Ghillie again after that buff ends, because you have to wait for the Ghillie Mantle cooldown. You can't do Ghillie, normal Ghillie, into again just Ghillie right after, so realistically it's 9 of the first 10 minutes, which is 90% uptime, but then for the next 10 minutes it's only up for around 7 of those, which is about 70% uptime, and that rate stays pretty consistent moving forward. So the first 10 minutes have abnormally high uptime at 90% if you go out of your way to use Ghillie Mantle at the start, but it then drops down to around 70% uptime for any remaining time left on the quest longer than the first 10 minutes. The main exception to that, however, is the Tool Specialist skill, which notably does affect Ghillie Mantle's cooldown as well as your selected mantles, not just the selected ones. This skill is innate on Uth Duna armor. You will get some ranks of it if you're using Uth Duna, and I fully expect it to be efficiently placed on the Gamma set as well if it's something you think you might care about. This gives you 10% cooldown reduction on your mantles per rank of the skill. This means that for the selectable mantles that all have a 10-minute cooldown, every rank of Tool Specialist is a full minute off of that timer. For the Ghillie Mantle, it is 30 seconds off of its cooldown per rank, and what's neat to mention about this though, is if you have 4 ranks of Tool Specialist, that is 40% quicker recharge speed, you can then keep 100% uptime on the Protective Veil set bonus purely through Ghillie Mantle, not even counting your main mantle, which you can then use a lot more sort of offensively. Because 40% cooldown reduction is the breakpoint you need to hit, or you get a 3-minute Ghillie Mantle cooldown. With the buff from Protective Veil lasting for 3 minutes, you can then just shove a Ghillie Mantle on every time it's off cooldown for literally half a second. It doesn't matter if you get hit, doesn't matter if you do the hit right afterwards, and then you will instantly have it removed, keep the defensive buff active until you have to repeat that action, which won't be until Ghillie Mantle comes off cooldown again. If you do that, you get 50 defense and 12 all-elemental resistance just permanently, and that isn't bad by any means. It's just that most players do prefer to focus building sets for pure offense, and so they would overlook this entirely. All of that to say, if we compromise and say the uptime of this set bonus would be around 80% average without Tool Specialist at all, that would make the 2 set bonus a 20 defense increase average throughout a hunt, and the 4 set bonus be 40 defense and 9.6 all element resist average through a hunt as well. The second that you have any ranks of Tool Specialist though, that uptime does go up, and at 4 ranks of Tool Specialist, it is a fully guaranteed 100% uptime for 25 defense from the 2 set bonus, and 50 defense with 12 all element resistance for the full 4 set bonus. And there is a specific synergy that you may or may not have guessed quite yet, but we'll be talking about that in a bit. For now, let's talk about peak performance. This is a pretty niche offensive skill. It normally takes up a 2-slot socket when used as a decoration, so it's not valued even by the game's own mechanics as highly as the 3-slot socket offensive skills to begin with. This gives a scaling attack boost depending on how many ranks of it you have, up to 20 bonus raw attack when at full 5 ranks. The activation condition for this is that your health is full, like fully full, not like 80% or above, like full, literally completely. This may sound good at first glance because you want to be full health anyways, right? And plus 20 attack is a pretty reasonable amount, but there's a few things to keep in mind here. First is that as a 2-slot socket filler, this skill would normally be competing with things like Counter Strike, which is 25 raw attack for 3 ranks of a skill, as opposed to 20 raw attack for 5 ranks of a skill, or things like Maximum Might, which for most weapons that can actually use it is basically just full 10% affinity per rank, which again is worth way more than the 3 to 5 attack per rank of peak performance. That said, we aren't here to compare the value of other skills to this, because that only matters if we know what the Arch-Tempered armor will look like, so that exact conversation will have to wait for a few days. For now though, let's be a bit more explicit about peak performance itself. The main caveat on this skill is that it requires your health to be full, and while that may not seem like a big deal because you want that anyways, watch your health bar over your next few hunts and actually pay attention to it. It is full from the start of a hunt until you get hit by an attack. Then from that point, how full is it going to be? Most players will drink the amount of healing they need to not be one-shottable by the monster and still be able to keep fighting. That means sometimes you'll be full health after you drink a potion, sometimes your potion will only get you to 85% health, but then it's not really worth taking another potion just for that last little bit, and you'll decide that's enough, or maybe a potion will even even take you to 90% health or 95% health, which does happen pretty frequently, and it's really not worth using a potion at that point, using some of your healing resources for that last tiny amount, unless you would die to an attack in one hit without doing that. And that means the uptime of peak performance is far lower than you might assume on paper. I'd say in most situations for most player, you would be very lucky to get even 50% uptime on this while actively hitting the monster without going out of your way to drink extra potions to make it be active more often. This will then cause a ton of healing and efficiency as well. It lowers your damage output because you're spending more time on healing rather than hitting the monster. There's a whole lot of issues with marking the exact uptime on the skill and the proper value. Obviously, if you are a speedrunner like god level player, literally never getting hit by a monster so your health never goes under full from the start of the quest, this won't be a problem for you. But if you are speedrunning, you're also probably going to be using the corrupted mantle, which innately disables peak performance because it does chip damage to you per second. So that is a sort of anti-synergy within itself. That said, I think it would be generous to say that we could expect 50% uptime on this skill, and I would also mention that any weapon that guards attacks basically can't use it outside of the synergy that we'll touch on in a moment, and same thing goes for weapons like greatsword or switch axe that purposefully use hyper armor frequently and take a little bit of chip damage. All of these weapons take small bits of damage, which are just tiny hits that put you under full health and deactivate peak performance, even if you are playing quote-unquote correctly, because correctly playing with those weapons involves taking small bits of damage. And so for the weapons without those conditions, it is still quite generous to say the average value for 5 ranks of peak performance is around 10 attack on average throughout a whole hunt, and you're much more likely to get around 5 average attack increase of value for it. That means for this skill to be worth it over other offensive skills, the armor pieces it's going to be attached to in the Gamma set would have to be just absolutely absurdly good. Like 3 ranks of peak performance, then 1 or maybe even 2 ranks of another valuable offensive skill, and then probably also a 3-slot socket, maybe even a 2-slot socket as well. But then we have the big main synergy option of Uth Duna to talk about here, which requires a little bit of player choice and agency to use. The main things with Uth Duna's set are incentivizing mantle use through the defensive set bonus and the high ranks of tool specialist as a skill, then peak performance, which is a damage increase when at max health. The fun part of this is probably the least used mantle in Monster Hunter Wilds, the mending mantle. Basically, this just heals you for free while it's equipped as long as you don't get hit for a short duration after taking damage. This is the missing piece to connect peak performance to tool specialist and protective veil, giving you increased defense after you put on the mending mantle so that any hits you take are less painful, but then after you do get hit while wearing it, if you avoid being hit for just a moment, you will heal back up to full super quickly, which immediately reactivates peak performance without you having to sheath and heal all that. This concept does work quite well in practice, but then has the main limitation of mantle duration and cooldown. The mending mantle is 80 seconds duration, 10-minute cooldown, which granted does go down to 5 minutes if you're using full tool specialist, which you would be in a proper Uth Duna set anyways, and that would bring it to 1 minute and 20 seconds active for every 5 minutes that it's not active, or right around 21% uptime on this combo, which of course is much lower uptime if you're not using tool specialist. So for a maximum of 21% of a hunt, you can be super risky and aggressive and keep peak performance active, but then the other 79% of the time, peak performance is basically just worse than any other offensive skill option in the entire game. So as a full conclusion on all of this, peak performance is really just meh if you're after offensive skills, but it does have specific synergy with the skills and set bonus on Uth Duna armor specifically. Presuming that it keeps the same theme going on for the Gamma version, this could work out, but it depends on the way that they actually put skills on the armor. The Uth Duna set bonus is relatively solid for survivability and for defensive reasons, but most players just don't really care about that past putting in some defensive skills in their 1-slot sockets and maybe upgrading their armor as well. So that's entirely up to you on how much value you want to place on that. All in all, I really hope that the arch-tempered Uth Duna armor does find some sort of way to up the ante here, maybe adding on another high-value offensive skill that regular Uth Duna armor doesn't use, or just giving it an insane amount of decoration slots. That could also be very fun to just make it sort of like a very customizable set. But given the bits that I expect to carry over from the regular Uth Duna armor set, I have very reserved expectations about how strong the Gamma set will end up being. I hope you've all enjoyed this then, and hopefully you've gained some sort of helpful knowledge either about this set specifically, or about Wilds as a whole that helps you enjoy the game more moving forwards. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.